What if the real reason you feel disconnected isn't your English, but the silence between your words? In this slow, real-life story set in the United States, I'll take you inside a marriage that almost broke without loud fights. A love that survived without perfect sentences and the quiet moments that changed everything. Stay with me because this might not just improve your English, it might change how you understand love. Does love need language? What if love doesn't fall apart because of words, but because of the warmth we slowly stop giving? There was a time in my life in the United States when everything looked perfectly normal. The house was quiet, clean, predictable. Dinner was always ready. The routines were stable. From the outside, it looked like a life many people would admire. But inside that same space, something invisible was quietly breaking, and the strangest part is, it made no sound at all. You probably know this kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind. I mean the heavy one. The kind that sits between two people on the same couch, both scrolling on their phones, both pretending to be fine, both waiting for the other person to speak first. I used to believe the problem was simple. My English wasn't good enough. I couldn't fully express what I felt. Every time I tried to say something deeper than, "I'm okay" or "I'm tired," my mind would freeze, like a slow-loading screen that never finishes. So I stopped trying. And when you stop trying, something dangerous begins. You start to believe that silence is safer than being misunderstood. At first, it feels comfortable.
No awkward sentences.
No wrong words.
No embarrassment.
Just quiet. But here's what most people don't realize. Your brain is not built for emotional silence. There's a small system in your mind called the amygdala, your brain's threat detector. Its job is to keep you safe. And when communication disappears, it doesn't relax. It becomes alert. So instead of thinking, maybe they're just tired, your brain quietly suggests something is wrong. Instead of they still care, it whispers, maybe they don't anymore. And just like that, two people who still love each other begin to feel like strangers. I remember one evening very clearly. Nothing dramatic happened.
No arguments.
No raised voices. Just a simple moment. We were sitting at the dinner table. The food was warm. The lighting was soft. It looked like a peaceful, happy scene. But inside, I felt completely alone. I wanted to say something real. I feel distant. I miss us. I don't know how to fix this. But all that came out was, the food is good. And just like that, the moment passed. That's how distance grows, not through big conflicts, but through small sentences that are never spoken. If you're learning English right now, you might think your biggest challenge is vocabulary, grammar, or pronunciation. That's what most people focus on. But living here taught me something deeper. Language is not just about words. It's about connection. You can know thousands of words and still feel alone. Or you can know very little and still feel deeply understood. Back then, I didn't understand this. I believed I needed perfect sentences before I could become a better partner, a better communicator, a better version of myself. So I waited. I waited until my English improved. I waited until I felt confident. I waited until I could speak correctly. And while I was waiting, the distance kept growing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Perfection delays connection. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional attunement. It means feeling seen, heard, and understood by another person. Studies show that this doesn't come from perfect grammar. It comes from tone, eye contact, timing, and small emotional signals. In simple words, your warmth matters more than your words. But at that time, I didn't know that yet. All I could feel was this. Every day was becoming a little quieter than the one before. And the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was starting to feel permanent. Have you ever experienced that? When you're not arguing, but you're not truly connecting either. That's the most dangerous place to be. Because nothing feels urgent enough to fix, but everything slowly fades. Looking back now, I can see my mistake clearly. I thought love required the right words, the right grammar, the right moment. But maybe the real question was never, is my English good enough? Maybe it was, am I warm enough to be understood, even without perfect words? And that question, that quiet, uncomfortable question, became the beginning of everything that changed my life. Because what happened next wasn't a big conversation. It wasn't dramatic. It was something small, almost invisible. But it was the first crack in the silence. And once that crack appeared, nothing stayed the same again. A very ordinary day. Have you ever lived a day that looks completely fine but feels quietly wrong? Not dramatic. Not broken. Just off. That was my life. For a long time in the United States, nothing big was falling apart. In fact, if you looked from the outside, everything seemed stable, almost ideal. But the strange thing about emotional distance is this. It doesn't announce itself. It hides inside normal days. And my days were very normal. Morning would begin the same way. The soft sound of the coffee machine. The low hum of the refrigerator. A bit of sunlight coming through the window, like it had a schedule of its own. Everything moved on time. Everything made sense. Except us. We would stand in the same kitchen, sometimes just a few feet apart, moving around each other like polite strangers. Not cold. Not angry. Just careful. Like two people trying not to disturb something fragile they didn't fully understand. Good morning, one of us would say. Morning, the other would reply. Simple. Correct. Grammatically perfect. And completely empty. That's the moment I started to notice something uncomfortable. You can say the right words and still say nothing at all. In the U.S., daily life moves efficiently. People respect space. Conversations are often short, clear, and direct. At first, I thought that was the reason for our distance. Maybe this was just how life worked here, less talking, more doing. But that explanation didn't feel right. Because even in silence, you can feel warmth. And we were slowly losing that. I remember one specific morning. It wasn't special in any way, but for some reason, it stayed with me. I was making coffee, and I accidentally dropped a spoon. It hit the floor with a sharp, loud sound. Too loud for such a quiet room. For a second, I froze. Not because of the noise, but because I realized that sound felt like the loudest thing in our house. Isn't that strange? A small piece of metal hitting the floor suddenly feels louder than two people who haven't really talked in days. That's when something uncomfortable crossed my mind. When silence becomes your routine, even noise feels like a disruption. You might think the problem here is communication skills. Maybe vocabulary. Maybe pronunciation. That's what I thought too. But here's something interesting from neuroscience. Your brain doesn't actually measure connection based on how many words you use. It measures safety. Emotional safety. There's a system in your body called the nervous system regulation. When you feel understood, even without many words, your body relaxes. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders drop. You feel safe. But when that connection disappears, your body stays slightly tense all the time. Not enough to panic. Just enough to feel tired. Every day. And that's exactly how I felt. Tired without a clear reason. We continued our routines. Breakfast. Work. Messages during the day. Did you eat? Yes. Okay. Short. Efficient. Empty. At some point, I started to notice a pattern in myself. I wasn't just struggling to speak English. I was avoiding emotional risk. Because speaking, especially in another language, is not just about grammar. It's about vulnerability. Every time you try to express a real feeling, you risk being misunderstood. And when your English isn't strong, that risk feels even bigger. So your brain does something very logical. It protects you by keeping things simple, safe, surface level. But here's the quiet danger. When everything stays on the surface, nothing grows deeper. I told myself a story back then. Maybe you've told yourself something similar. It's okay. We're just busy. It's normal. This is adult life. We don't need to talk that much. And for a while that story worked. Until it didn't. Because one evening, something small happened again. We were sitting in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. Just background noise filling the space where conversation used to live. I looked over, and for a brief second, I saw something I hadn't noticed clearly before. Distance. Not physical distance. Emotional distance. The kind where you realize you don't actually know what the other person is thinking anymore. That moment hit quietly. No drama. No music. Just a simple realization. We were sharing a life, but not really sharing ourselves. And here's the part that made it even more confusing. I knew the words. I had learned enough English to say basic things. I could function. I could survive daily conversations. But when it came to feelings, everything still felt locked. That's when I started asking myself a different question. Not, how can I speak better English? But, why do I feel so far away even when I'm right here? Psychology has a simple answer for this, and it's surprisingly honest. Humans don't connect through information. They connect through emotion. You don't build closeness by exchanging perfect sentences. You build it by sharing imperfect truths. But at that time, I was still trying to be correct.
Still trying to sound right.
Still trying not to make mistakes. And in doing so, I was slowly removing the most important part of communication, my real self. Looking back, that ordinary day wasn't ordinary at all. It was a turning point hiding in routine. Because that was the day I realized something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't that I didn't have enough words. The problem was, I wasn't using the ones I already had to be real. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That quiet, simple awareness began to grow. Slowly. Uncomfortably. But steadily. And it led to a moment I didn't expect at all. A moment so small, most people would ignore it. But for me, it became the first real shift. The first time something in me said, maybe it's not about saying more. Maybe it's about feeling more. And what happened after that moment was the beginning of a completely different kind of conversation. Not louder, not more complex, but finally real. When silence becomes fear. There's a strange moment in any relationship when silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling dangerous. Not because something loud is happening, but because nothing is. That's where I found myself. Not in a fight. Not in a crisis. Just in a quiet space that slowly turned into something heavier than words. At first, I told myself it was normal. Life in the United States is busy. People work long hours. Conversations get shorter. Everyone values independence. It's easy to believe that less talking simply means maturity. But deep down, something didn't agree with that explanation. Because even in the busiest lives, people who feel connected still find small ways to reach each other. And we weren't doing that anymore. The silence between us started to change its shape. It wasn't just the absence of words. It became a presence of something else. Tension. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. Like walking into a room and sensing something is off, even when everything looks normal. And here's the part that surprised me the most. The less we spoke, the harder it became to start again. Have you ever noticed that? The longer you avoid a conversation, the bigger it feels in your head. Your brain begins to rehearse possibilities. What if I say it wrong? What if they misunderstand? What if it makes things worse? And when you're using a second language, those thoughts get even louder. Because now it's not just emotional risk, it's linguistic risk too. So your brain does what it's designed to do.
It protects you.
It says, stay quiet. It's safer. And in the short term, it works. You avoid awkwardness. You avoid mistakes. You avoid discomfort. But in the long term, you create distance. Psychologists call this avoidance behavior. It's one of the brain's favorite strategies. When something feels uncomfortable, we don't solve it. We move away from it. But here's the catch. Avoidance doesn't remove the problem. It feeds it. Every time you choose silence over expression, your brain learns a new rule. Speaking is risky. Silence is safe. And once that rule is repeated enough times, it becomes automatic. That's exactly what happened to me. I started avoiding even the simplest emotional expressions. Not big conversations, just small ones. I miss you. I feel tired today. I need a little support. These are not complex sentences. You don't need advanced English to say them. But when fear is involved, even simple words feel heavy. I remember one afternoon. It was quiet again, like most days. I was sitting there thinking about saying something. Anything that felt real. I even practiced it in my head. I feel a little disconnected today. Simple.
Clear.
Honest. But when the moment came,
I didn't say it.
Instead, I asked something safe. Did you finish your work? And just like that, the opportunity disappeared. That's how fear works. It doesn't stop you loudly. It gently redirects you towards safety. And safety, in this case, meant distance. There's something important happening inside your brain during moments like this. When you consider saying something vulnerable, your amygdala, the emotional alarm system, activates. It doesn't care if the threat is real or imagined. To your brain, emotional exposure can feel just as risky as physical danger. So it sends signals. Your heart beats faster. Your chest feels tight. Your thoughts become unclear. And suddenly, a simple sentence feels like a huge risk. So you stay quiet. Not because you don't care, but because your brain is trying to protect you from discomfort. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Protection and connection don't always work together. The more you protect yourself from discomfort, the more you distance yourself from closeness. And I was becoming very good at protecting myself. Too good. Days passed. Then weeks. Our conversations became predictable, functional, safe. But something important was missing.
Curiosity.
We stopped asking each other real questions. How are you really? What's been on your mind? Are you okay? Those questions require more than language. They require presence. And presence is hard when fear is in control. One night, something small shifted again. We were in the same room doing separate things.
No tensión.
No conflict. Just quiet. But this time, the silence felt different. Heavier. Almost like it was asking a question. And for the first time, I didn't try to escape it. I just sat there and noticed something. The fear I was feeling wasn't about English. It wasn't about grammar. It wasn't about pronunciation. It was about being seen. Because when you say something real, especially something emotional, you are allowing another person to see a part of you that is not protected. And that's uncomfortable in any language. That realization hit me slowly, but clearly. I had been blaming language for something much deeper. Yes, my English wasn't perfect, but the real barrier wasn't vocabulary. It was vulnerability. And once that truth becomes visible, something inside you starts to shift. Because now the question changes. It's no longer, how can I speak better? It becomes, how can I be more honest, even with simple words? That question doesn't have an easy answer, but it creates a new kind of awareness. And awareness is where change begins. Not loud change. Not dramatic transformation. Just a small shift in how you see yourself and how you see the silence. That night, I didn't suddenly become confident. I didn't suddenly say everything I felt. But something important happened. For the first time, I didn't see silence as safety. I saw it as distance. And that changed everything. Because once you realize that silence is not protecting your relationship, but quietly weakening it, you can't go back to ignoring it. And that's when I knew something had to change. Not tomorrow, not someday, but soon. Because if nothing changed, this quiet distance would eventually become something permanent. And the scariest part? It wouldn't happen with a fight. It would happen with nothing. No words.
No noise.
Just silence doing its work. But what happened next wasn't a big decision. It wasn't a long conversation. It was something much smaller. A moment so simple most people would miss it. But that moment was the first time I chose connection over protection. And it started with just a few imperfect words. The moment that woke me up. Sometimes, the moment that changes your life doesn't look important at all. No dramatic music. No big argument. No life-changing speech. Just a small, almost forgettable moment that quietly shifts something inside you. That's exactly how it happened to me. It was an ordinary evening in the United States. The kind you've already seen 100 times in your own life. The sky was turning dark. The house felt calm. Everything was in its place. We were in the kitchen again. Same space. Same routine. But something felt slightly different. Not outside. Inside. I was standing there, holding a glass of water, watching the reflection of the light on the counter. And for a strange second, I felt like I was watching my own life from the outside.
Two people.
Same house. Same routine. Same silence. And then something very small happened. I dropped the glass. It didn't shatter completely, but the sound was sharp enough to break the quiet. Water spread across the floor, slowly moving in different directions, like it didn't know where to go. We both looked down at the mess. And then we looked at each other. It wasn't a long look, just a few seconds. But in that moment, something unusual happened. There were no words. No, are you okay? No, it's fine. No reaction at all. Just eye contact. And for the first time in a long time, I noticed something I had been missing. Emotion. Not clear. Not defined. But present. It was subtle, but it was there. And that's when it hit me. We weren't disconnected because we didn't have words. We were disconnected because we had stopped showing each other what we felt. You see, most people think communication is about speaking. But neuroscience tells a different story. Over 70% of human communication is nonverbal. Eye contact, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. Your brain reads these signals faster than it processes words. So, even when you say nothing, you're still communicating something. And in our case, we had been communicating distance. Not intentionally, just consistently. That moment in the kitchen was the first time I became fully aware of it. Because in that short eye contact, I didn't see anger. I didn't see frustration. I saw something much more uncomfortable. Disconnection mixed with hesitation. Like two people who wanted to reach out but didn't know how anymore. And here's the part that changed everything. For the first time, I didn't look away. Usually I would break eye contact quickly. It felt easier, safer, less exposed. But this time I stayed. Just 1 second longer than usual. And something inside me reacted immediately. My heart started beating faster. My chest felt tight. My brain went into overdrive. Say something. Don't say something. What if it's wrong? What if it's awkward? This is what happens when you're about to step outside your emotional comfort zone. Your nervous system reacts before your logic does. It tries to pull you back into safety, back into silence, back into what's familiar.
But something was different this time.
Instead of escaping that feeling, I stayed in it, just for a moment. And then, without planning it, without rehearsing it perfectly, I said something. Not a perfect sentence. Not a grammatically impressive one. Just something real. I feel a little far from you. That was it. Simple. Slightly broken. Not elegant. But honest. And then silence again. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. There's a concept in psychology called emotional risk-taking. It means choosing to express something real, even when the outcome is uncertain. Your brain hates this, because it cannot predict the response. And unpredictability feels like danger. So in that moment, after I spoke, my mind immediately started preparing for the worst. What if nothing changes? What if this makes things worse? What if I just made it awkward again? But something unexpected happened. Not a big reaction. Not a long conversation.
Just a small shift.
A response that didn't fix everything, but changed the direction. I know, came the reply.
Soft.
Quiet.
Honest.
And then a pause. I feel it too. That moment didn't solve our problems. It didn't suddenly make everything perfect, but it did something more important. It broke the pattern. For weeks, maybe longer, we had been following the same emotional script. Silence, avoidance, distance. But in that moment, something new entered the pattern. Honesty. Even if it was small. Even if it was imperfect. Even if it was late. And here's what's fascinating from a neuroscience perspective. When you express something real and receive a safe response, your brain starts to update its internal model. It begins to learn. Maybe this isn't dangerous. Maybe it's okay to speak. Maybe connection is still possible. That's how change actually begins. Not through motivation, not through big decisions, but through small, repeated experiences that slowly retrain your brain. That night, nothing dramatic happened after that. We cleaned up the water.
We moved on.
The house became quiet again. But the silence didn't feel the same anymore, because now there was something inside it.
A crack.
A possibility. A reminder that connection hadn't disappeared. It had just been buried under fear and habit. And once you see that, everything starts to look different. You begin to notice the moments where you can choose. Stay silent or say something small but real. Avoid or risk a little honesty. Protect yourself or move slightly closer. That moment in the kitchen didn't fix our relationship, but it woke me up. It showed me that the problem was never about speaking perfect English. It was about being willing to speak imperfect truth. And more importantly, it showed me that the other person was still there, still feeling, still waiting, just like me. And once that realization settles in, you can't go back to pretending everything is fine, because now you know, the distance is not permanent. It's just unspoken. And if something is unspoken,
it can still be changed.
But not all at once. Not with big conversations. Just like that first moment, it begins with something small, something slow, something almost too simple to matter. And that's exactly what happened next. We didn't suddenly become great communicators. We didn't have deep conversations every night. Instead, something much quieter started to grow. A different kind of connection. One that didn't depend on perfect words. One that didn't wait for the right moment. One that was built in the smallest ways possible. And strangely enough, that's where everything truly began to change. Warmth changes everything. What if the smallest change you make quietly rewrites the entire relationship? Not a big promise. Not a long conversation. Not perfect English. Just a little more warmth than yesterday. After that moment in the kitchen, nothing dramatic happened. We didn't suddenly become a couple who talked for hours. There was no emotional breakthrough scene, no cinematic confession. Life stayed ordinary. But something subtle had shifted. Before, silence felt like a wall. Now it felt more like a space, uncomfortable, but not impossible to cross. And the strange part is, the change didn't begin with words. It began with behavior. The next morning, everything looked the same. The kitchen,
The coffee.
the quiet routine. But this time, I made a small decision, so small it almost felt pointless. Instead of just saying good morning and moving on, I paused. Just for a second. And I added something simple. Good morning, did you sleep okay? That's it. A basic sentence. Nothing impressive. But here's what made it different. It carried attention. In psychology, there's a concept called microconnections. These are small, everyday interactions that build emotional closeness over time. A glance, a tone, a short question that shows you care. Individually, they seem insignificant. But repeated daily, they become the foundation of connection. At that time, I didn't know the term microconnections. I just knew this felt different. The response wasn't dramatic. Yeah, I did. You? But something changed in the tone.
Softer.
More present. And that's how it started. Not with deep conversations, but with small, consistent shifts. Instead of focusing on speaking perfectly, I started focusing on being present. Instead of asking, is this sentence correct? I started asking, does this feel real? And that question changed everything. Because when you focus on correctness, you become careful. But when you focus on connection, you become human. There's something interesting your brain does when it senses warmth. It releases oxytocin, a hormone often called the bonding chemical. It's the same chemical involved in trust, closeness, and emotional safety. And here's the key point. Oxytocin doesn't require perfect language. It responds to intention, to tone, to small signals that say, I see you. So even a simple sentence like, did you eat, can feel completely different depending on how you say it. Cold, functional, warm, caring. Same words, different impact. That realization changed how I communicated. I stopped trying to sound smart. I stopped trying to avoid mistakes. And I started doing something much simpler. I showed up slightly more. A little more eye contact. A slightly softer tone. A small smile that I didn't force but didn't hide either. At first it felt awkward. Almost unnatural. Because when you've been distant for a while, warmth feels unfamiliar. Your brain even questions it. Is this real? Is this too much? What if it's not returned? That's the risk of emotional change. You don't know if the other person will meet you there. But here's what I learned. Warmth is not a negotiation. It's a decision. You don't give it because you're sure of the outcome. You give it because you choose the kind of person you want to be in the relationship. And slowly something began to happen. The responses changed. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But gradually. Short answers became slightly longer. Eye contact lasted a little more. Silence felt less heavy. We were still not perfect. But we were trying. And trying creates movement. There was one evening that made this shift very clear. We were having dinner again. Same table. Same routine. But this time, I did something different. Instead of staying in safe, surface-level conversation, I added one small layer of honesty. Not too deep. Not overwhelming. Just real enough. Today felt a bit long for me, I said. That's it. Not emotional. Not dramatic. but it was personal. And for a second, I felt that familiar tension again. The one that says, you're stepping out of your safe zone. But this time I didn't retreat. And the response came slowly. Yeah, I had a long day too. Then a pause. And then something unexpected. What made it feel long for you? That question was new, not because of the words, but because of the intention behind it. Curiosity had returned. And curiosity is a powerful signal of connection. It means, I want to understand you. That night, the conversation didn't become deep or perfect, but it lasted longer. It moved slightly beyond routine. And most importantly, it felt alive. That's when I realized something important. Connection doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds in layers. Tiny, almost invisible layers. A question here, a tone there, a moment of honesty that doesn't get ignored. And over time, those layers create something stronger than before. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Looking back, I can see the shift clearly. Before, I was waiting for confidence before speaking. Now, I was building confidence by speaking imperfectly but honestly. And this applies not just to relationships, but to learning English too. Many people wait. Wait to be ready. Wait to be fluent. Wait to feel confident. But connection, whether in language or in love, doesn't wait for perfection. It grows through participation, through small attempts, through showing up even when it's not smooth. That's what changed everything for me. Not a big breakthrough, not a perfect sentence, just a simple decision to bring a little more warmth into ordinary moments. And here's the surprising part. Warmth doesn't just change the other person. It changes you. You become less afraid, less guarded, more open to connection. And once that shift begins, it doesn't stay small for long, because those tiny moments start to connect. They form patterns, new habits, a different rhythm between two people. And slowly, almost without noticing, the relationship begins to feel different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just closer. But even then, the journey wasn't smooth, because as warmth grows, so does something else. Something hidden. Something shaped by culture, habits, and expectations. And that's where the next challenge appeared. Not in language, not in silence, but in the subtle differences we didn't fully understand yet. The brain, fear, and emotional reflex. What if the hardest part of love isn't understanding another person, but understanding your own reactions? Because here's the truth most people don't realize. You don't respond to your partner. You respond to your brain's interpretation of your partner. And that interpretation is not always accurate. After we started adding small moments of warmth back into our daily life, things did improve. The silence felt lighter. Conversations became slightly more natural. There were even moments that felt easy again. But something unexpected began to show up. Not outside. Inside me. Small emotional reactions that didn't seem to match the situation. A short reply would feel like rejection. A delayed response would feel like distance. A neutral tone would suddenly feel cold. And the strange part? Nothing had actually gone wrong. This is where the real challenge began. Not communication, but perception. There's a system in your brain called the predictive mind. Its job is to constantly guess what's happening around you based on past experiences. It doesn't wait for full information. It fills in the gaps. Fast. Automatically. And sometimes incorrectly. So if you've experienced distance before, your brain starts to expect it, even when things are getting better. This is called negative bias. Your brain is slightly more sensitive to potential problems than positive signals. It's a survival mechanism. Thousands of years ago, this helped humans stay alive. Today, it can quietly damage relationships. Because instead of seeing what is happening, you start reacting to what you fear might happen. I remember one afternoon very clearly. We had been doing better for a few days. Small conversations. Slightly more warmth. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. And then, a small moment happened. I said something simple. I might go out later for a walk. The response came back. Okay. That's it. One word. Neutral.
Calm.
Completely normal. But inside me, something shifted instantly. Okay? That's all? Why does that sound so distant? Did I do something wrong? In less than 5 seconds, my brain created a story. A story with no real evidence. This is how fast emotional misinterpretation happens. Before logic even has a chance to speak, your brain has already decided what something means. And your body reacts as if that meaning is true. Heart slightly faster. Breathing a bit shallow. A quiet tension building in your chest. That's not communication. That's reflex. In neuroscience, this is called an emotional reflex loop. Trigger, interpretation, reaction. And most of the time, the interpretation step is invisible. You don't realize you're interpreting. You think you're observing reality. But you're not. You're reacting to a version of reality filtered through your past fears. That afternoon, I almost followed the old pattern. Withdraw. Stay quiet. Let the distance grow again. Because that's what felt natural. That's what felt safe. But something was different now. I had started noticing my reactions. And awareness changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you have a choice. Not a big, dramatic choice. Just a small pause. Instead of reacting immediately, I stopped. Just for a moment. And I asked myself a simple question. What else could this mean? This question is powerful. Because it interrupts the automatic story your brain creates. Maybe okay wasn't distance. Maybe it was just okay. Maybe there was no hidden meaning. Maybe nothing was wrong. That small shift didn't remove the feeling completely, but it gave me space. Space between the trigger and the reaction. And in that space, something new became possible. Instead of withdrawing, I did something different. I stayed. And I added just a little clarity. Hey, when you say, okay, I'm not sure how you feel. Not perfect. Not smooth. But honest. And the response came quickly. Oh, I just meant, yeah, that sounds good. Simple.
Clear.
No hidden meaning. And just like that, the entire emotional story in my head collapsed. That's when I understood something deeply important. Many relationship problems are not caused by what is said. They are caused by what is assumed. And assumptions are often built on fear, not facts. This applies to language learning too. When you hear something in English that you don't fully understand, your brain fills in the gaps. Sometimes correctly. Sometimes completely wrong. And if you don't check it, that misunderstanding becomes your reality. That's why clarity matters more than complexity. It's better to ask a simple question than to build a complex misunderstanding. That moment changed how I handled communication. Not by becoming perfect, but by becoming more aware. I started noticing my internal reactions. Am I reacting to reality or to my interpretation? And that question slowed everything down, in a good way, because when you slow down your reaction, you give your brain time to update, to learn something new, to realize that not every neutral moment is negative. Not every short answer means distance. Not every silence means disconnection. Over time, this rewires your emotional responses. Your brain becomes less reactive, more flexible, more open to possibility. And something surprising happens. You stop needing perfect communication. Because you stop turning small moments into big problems. That's when connection becomes easier. Not because everything is clear, but because not everything needs to be overinterpreted. Looking back, this was one of the biggest shifts in my journey. Not learning more words,
Not speaking faster.
but understanding my own mind. Because once you understand your emotional reflexes, you stop being controlled by them. And when that happens, you become a safer person to communicate with. Not just for others, but for yourself. But even with this awareness, there was still something deeper we had to face. Something that wasn't just inside my mind, but between us. Something shaped by culture, by habits, by different ways of seeing the world. Because sometimes the gap between two people is not created by fear alone, but by differences they don't even realize exist. And that's where the next challenge began. Not louder, not clearer, but more complex than anything before. Slow conversations, real connection. What if the reason you still feel disconnected isn't because you don't know enough English, but because you're moving too fast to be understood? That idea didn't make sense to me at first, because for the longest time, I believed the opposite. I thought if I could speak faster, use better words, and respond more quickly, everything would improve. That's what most people aim for when learning English in the United States: speed, fluency, confidence. But what I discovered in real life, inside a quiet relationship that almost faded, was something very different. Speed was not helping me connect. It was hiding me. After becoming more aware of my emotional reactions, I started noticing something subtle in our conversations. Whenever I felt nervous or unsure, I would try to speak faster. Not because I had more to say, but because I wanted to finish before I made a mistake. Have you ever done that? You rush your sentence. You skip words. You simplify too much. And then, at the end, you're not even sure if the other person understood what you meant. That was me. And the strange part is, the faster I spoke, the less connected I felt. Because connection doesn't come from speed. It comes from presence. So without planning it as a strategy, I started slowing down. At first, it wasn't intentional. It happened naturally because I was thinking more about what I felt, not just what I should say. Instead of reacting immediately, I would pause. Just a second. Sometimes two. And in that small pause, something interesting happened. I became more aware of my tone, of my intention, of the person in front of me. And that changed the entire rhythm of our conversations. One evening, this shift became very clear. We were sitting together again, same familiar space, same quiet background. But this time, instead of filling the silence quickly, I let it exist for a moment. Not as something to escape, but as something to enter carefully. Then I said, slowly, "Today felt a little strange for me." I didn't rush the sentence. I didn't try to make it perfect. I just let it come out at the speed of my thoughts. And something surprising happened. Instead of responding immediately, the other person paused too. Not awkwardly, but naturally. Like the conversation had found a new rhythm. Then came the reply. What felt strange about it? Simple question, but different. More open, more present. That's when I realized something powerful. When you slow down your speech, you give the other person space to join you. In communication psychology, this is called synchronization. It's when two people begin to match each other's pace, tone, and emotional state. It's not something you force. It happens when both people feel safe enough to be present. And safety grows in slowness. Because when things move too fast, your brain switches into performance mode. Say it right. Don't make mistakes. Respond quickly. But when things slow down, your brain shifts into connection mode. Feel it. Notice it. Share it. That small change, just slowing down, started to transform everything. Our conversations didn't become longer immediately. They became deeper. even with simple words. I feel tired. Today was heavy. I liked that moment earlier. These are not advanced English sentences. But when spoken slowly, with attention, they carry meaning. Real meaning. And that's what I had been missing. Not vocabulary. Not grammar. But emotional weight behind the words. There's also something happening in the brain when you slow down communication. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for thinking, understanding, and empathy, becomes more active. At the same time, your amygdala, the fear center, calms down. So instead of reacting quickly, you start responding thoughtfully. And that changes the quality of everything you say. I began to notice another pattern too. When I spoke slowly and honestly, the other person didn't just hear my words, they felt them. And feeling creates connection faster than understanding. That's a powerful idea. You don't need perfect English to be felt. You just need to be real and present. There was one moment that made this very clear to me. We were talking about something small, just a normal day, nothing special. But in the middle of the conversation, I paused again. And instead of continuing with the topic, I said, I think I'm still learning how to say what I feel. It wasn't a strong sentence. It wasn't confident, but it was true. And after I said it, there was silence. But this silence felt completely different from before. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of attention. Full of understanding. And then came a response I didn't expect. That's okay. I think I am too. That moment stayed with me because it showed me something I hadn't fully understood before. We weren't two people on opposite sides, struggling separately. We were two people in the same space, both trying, both learning, both unsure. And suddenly, the pressure disappeared. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to speak like a native speaker. I just needed to show up, honestly. That's when English stopped feeling like a barrier and started becoming a bridge. Not because it was perfect, but because it was shared. From that point on, our conversations became something new, slower,
Softer.
more intentional. Sometimes we would pause in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes we would search for words. Sometimes we would laugh at small mistakes. And instead of breaking the connection, those moments strengthened it because they were real. Looking back, I can say this clearly. Fast English didn't bring us closer. Slow, honest English did. And not just English. Slow attention. Slow listening. Slow presence. That's what rebuilt everything. So, if you're learning English right now, feeling stuck or frustrated, thinking you're not good enough yet, maybe the answer is not to push harder, not to speak faster, but to slow down just enough to feel what you're saying. Because connection doesn't need speed. It needs sincerity. And once that sincerity becomes part of your communication, everything begins to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically,
But deeply.
and quietly. But just when things started to feel more stable, another layer revealed itself. Something we hadn't fully understood yet. Because even when two people are trying, and even when they are present, there are still invisible differences that shape how they think, feel, and respond. Differences that don't come from language, but from culture. And those differences were about to test everything we had started to rebuild. Cultural differences you don't see. What if the real reason you feel misunderstood isn't your English, but the invisible rules you didn't know you were following? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't just speak a language. You live inside a culture. And culture speaks even when you don't. By the time our conversations became slower, softer, and more honest, I thought we had already passed the hardest part. The silence was no longer heavy. The distance had started to shrink. There was warmth again, small, but real. But then something unexpected began to happen. We were talking more, but not always understanding more. Have you ever experienced that? You say something clearly. The words are simple. The sentence is correct. But the reaction you get feels slightly off. Not wrong. Just not what you expected. That's when I realized something important. Even when language improves, misunderstanding can still exist. Because meaning doesn't come only from words. It comes from the cultural lens behind those words. In the United States, communication often values directness,
clarity,
individual expression. People are encouraged to say what they think, even if it's uncomfortable. But the way I naturally communicated was different. I was used to reading the room, to softening messages, to expecting others to feel what I meant, even if I didn't say it clearly. So, without realizing it, I was sending signals that didn't translate the way I thought they would. One evening, this difference became impossible to ignore. We were talking about something small, just a plan for the weekend. Nothing emotional. Nothing serious. I said, casually, maybe we can go out if you want. Simple sentence. Polite. Flexible. But the response came back. Do you want to go or not? That question caught me off guard. Because in my mind, I had already expressed my intention. Maybe meant yes, but gentle. If you want meant I care about your preference too. But from the other side, it sounded unclear. Indecisive. Even distant. And in that moment, I felt that familiar confusion again. I said it already, didn't I? But here's what I started to understand. We weren't misunderstanding the words. We were interpreting the intention differently. In communication psychology, this is called high context versus low context communication. High context cultures rely on tone, context, and unspoken cues. Low context cultures rely on clear, direct language. Neither is wrong. But when they meet, friction appears. That friction is subtle. It doesn't look like conflict. It feels like confusion. Like two people reading the same sentence, but hearing different meanings. And if you're not aware of it, it slowly creates distance again. That evening, instead of feeling frustrated, I paused. Because now I had learned something important. When something feels off, it's not always emotional. Sometimes it's cultural. So instead of defending my way of speaking, I asked a simple question. Does that sound unclear to you? And the answer came, honestly, a little. I'm not sure what you really want. That moment changed something for me. Because I realized this wasn't about right or wrong. It was about translation, not of language, but of intention. So I tried something different. I adjusted. Not who I was, but how I expressed it. I do want to go. I just also want to know what you think.
Same feeling.
Clearer structure. And suddenly, everything aligned. Oh, okay. Then yeah, let's go.
Simple. Easy. No confusión.
That's when I saw it clearly. Sometimes, connection doesn't require deeper emotion. It requires clearer delivery. Especially in a culture where directness is a form of respect, not distance. That realization didn't just change how I spoke. It changed how I listened, because I started noticing things I had missed before. Short answers weren't always cold. They were often just efficient. Direct questions weren't aggressive. They were often just honest. Silence wasn't always distance. It was sometimes just space. And once you understand that, you stop taking everything personally. You start seeing patterns instead of problems. There's also a scientific reason why cultural differences feel so strong. Your brain builds communication habits over years based on your environment. These habits become automatic. So when you encounter a different style, your brain doesn't say, "This is different." It says, "This is wrong." And that's where misunderstanding begins. But awareness interrupts that reaction. It gives you a new option.
Curiosity.
Instead of thinking, "Why are they like this?" You start asking, how does this work for them? That shift is small, but powerful, because curiosity opens the door that judgment closes. And in relationships, that door matters. Over time, we started adjusting to each other. Not perfectly, but intentionally. I became more direct when it mattered. He became more patient with my way of expressing things. And somewhere in the middle we met, not in language, but in understanding. There was one moment that made this change very real. We were having another simple conversation, nothing emotional, just daily life. And without thinking too much, I said, I'd like to spend some time together tonight.
Clear, direct, honest.
And the response came immediately. Yeah, I'd like that too.
No confusión. No hesitación.
No distance. Just alignment. That moment felt easy. And ease is something you don't notice until it's been missing. Looking back, I can say this clearly. We didn't just learn how to speak to each other. We learned how to understand each other's worlds. And that's much deeper. Because language can be learned quickly. But perspective takes time. So if you're feeling misunderstood, even when your English is improving, it might not be your vocabulary. It might be your invisible habits. The way you soften things. The way you expect others to read between the lines. The way you avoid being too direct. And none of that is wrong. But in a different cultural context, it needs translation, not correction. Translation. Because once intention becomes clear, connection becomes easier. But even with better understanding, clearer communication, and more warmth, life doesn't pause. It moves forward. And with it, new roles appear. New responsibilities. New challenges. Because when love continues, it doesn't stay the same. It grows. And sometimes, that growth comes in the form of something that changes everything. Not just between two people, but within a family. And that's where the story took another turn. One that brought more meaning, but also tested everything we had learned so far. Family, children, and the language of connection. What if the moment you think you finally understand each other, life quietly gives you a new role that tests everything again? Not louder, not harder, just deeper. Because connection between two people is one thing. Connection inside a family is something else entirely. By the time we reached this stage, things between us had changed. Not perfectly, not magically, but meaningfully. We spoke more slowly. We listened more carefully. We understood each other better. Not just through words, but through tone, timing, and intention. There was warmth again. And then life expanded. A child entered our world. And with that single change, everything we thought we understood about communication was tested again in a completely different way. Because children don't care about your vocabulary. They don't wait for perfect grammar. They don't analyze your sentence structure. They respond to something much more direct. Energy, emotion, presence. And suddenly, I was in a new situation where language became both simpler and more important than ever. I remember the first time I tried to speak to my child in English with intention. Not just functional words like eat, sleep, or come here, but something more emotional. Something that carried meaning. I'm here. It was a simple sentence. But when I said it, I realized something surprising. I wasn't just speaking to my child. I was also relearning how to communicate from the beginning. Because with children, you don't hide behind complexity. You don't use long explanations. You don't perform. You connect. And that forced me to become more honest in the way I spoke. Short sentences. Clear tone. Real feeling. And here's the interesting part. That simplicity started to influence how I communicated with my partner too. Because when you spend enough time expressing things in a clear, direct, emotional way for a child, it changes your habits. You stop overcomplicating. You stop hiding behind safe language. You start saying what matters more directly. There's also something happening in the brain during this phase. When you interact with a child, your mirror neurons become highly active. These are the parts of your brain responsible for empathy and emotional connection. They help you read expressions, respond to feelings, and adjust your behavior in real time. In simple terms, you become more emotionally aware. And that awareness doesn't stay limited to the child. It spreads. I started noticing small things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way tone changed meaning. The way timing affected response. The way a simple pause could either create connection or distance. One evening, this became very clear. We were at home after a long day. The child was finally asleep. The house was quiet again, but not the heavy silence from before. This silence felt earned. We were both tired, but present. And instead of falling back into old patterns, something different happened. We started talking.
Not deeply.
Not dramatically. Just naturally. How was today? A bit long. Yeah, me too. Simple exchange. But then, something small shifted. I think we're doing better, I said. It wasn't planned. It just came out. And this time, I didn't rush it. I didn't soften it too much. I didn't hide behind maybe or kind of. I said it clearly. And there was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just real. Then came the response. Yeah, I think so too. That moment felt different from anything before. Because it wasn't about fixing something.
It was about recognizing something. Progress.
And progress, when shared, becomes connection. There's a concept in psychology called shared meaning. It refers to the sense that two people are building something together, not just living side by side, but actually experiencing life as a team. That night, I felt that for the first time in a long time. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were aware of the same reality. We both saw the change. We both felt it. And that alignment created a deeper level of trust. But here's the part that surprised me the most. Having a child didn't just add responsibility. It added clarity. Because when you watch a child learn to communicate, you see something very pure. They don't wait to be perfect. They don't avoid mistakes. They don't overthink every word. They try. Again and again. They say something wrong and then try again. They express emotion, even without words. They connect before they fully understand language. And that changed how I saw myself. Because I realized I had been doing the opposite. Waiting. Avoiding. Overthinking. Trying to be correct instead of being real. And watching that difference every single day slowly reshaped me. I became more patient with my own mistakes, more open to imperfect sentences, more willing to express something small instead of nothing at all. And that didn't just improve my English. It improved my relationships. Because communication is not a performance. It's a process. And families don't grow through perfect conversations. They grow through consistent, imperfect connection. There was one moment that stayed with me. A very simple one. I said something slightly wrong in English, just a small mistake. Normally, I would have corrected myself quickly, maybe even felt embarrassed. But this time, I didn't. I just continued. And nothing went wrong.
No confusión. No judgment.
No problem. That's when it hit me. The pressure I felt was mostly inside me, not outside. And once that pressure started to fade, everything became lighter. Speaking felt easier. Listening felt clearer. Being present felt natural. Looking back, I can say this. Family doesn't make communication easier. It makes it more honest. Because there's no space to hide. Only space to grow. And that growth doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in daily life. Small conversations, simple words, repeated attempts. That's what changed everything for us. Not a perfect system, not perfect English, just a shared effort to keep showing up. But even as things improved, something else began to appear. Something quieter, something deeper. Because when connection becomes more stable, you start to notice something you couldn't see before. Not the problems, but the change inside yourself. And that change was about to become the most important part of the entire journey. When it finally feels easy, what if the moment you stop trying so hard is the moment everything finally starts to work? Not perfectly, not magically, just naturally. There's a quiet shift that happens in life when something you once struggled with becomes part of you. You don't notice it immediately. There's no clear line, no dramatic before and after moment. But one day you look back and realize, this used to be hard. That's exactly what happened to me. After everything, the silence, the fear, the slow conversations, the misunderstandings, the small changes, there came a point where communication no longer felt like something I had to manage. It just happened. And the strangest part? Nothing around me had changed dramatically. Same house, same routines, same people. But the experience was completely different. One morning, I noticed it in the simplest way. We were in the kitchen again. Yes, the same kitchen where silence once felt heavy, where even small sounds felt loud. But this time, something was different. We were talking, not about anything important, just normal things. Plans for the day. Something we saw online. A small joke that didn't even matter. And yet it felt easy.
No hesitation. No overthinking.
No internal pressure to say it right. The words came out naturally. Not perfect, but real. And more importantly, enough. That's when I realized something powerful. You don't need perfect English to feel fluent in your life. You just need enough to express what matters. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It refers to how much mental effort your brain is using at any given moment. When you're learning a language or trying to fix a relationship, your cognitive load is high. You're thinking about everything. Is this correct? Did I say that right? What should I say next? What if I make a mistake? And all that thinking creates tension. But over time, as you repeat small actions, slow conversations, honest expressions, warm responses, your brain starts to automate those patterns. The load decreases. You stop thinking about every step. And that's when things begin to feel easy. Not because they are simple, but because they have become familiar. I noticed it in how I listened to. Before, when someone spoke, especially in English, I would focus hard on understanding every word. If I missed something, I would panic slightly inside. Now, I listen for meaning, not perfection. And that changed everything. Because communication is not about catching every word. It's about catching the intention. Once you understand that, you stop chasing accuracy. And you start experiencing connection. There was one moment that made this shift very clear. We were having a conversation. Again, nothing special. And suddenly I realized I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I wasn't preparing my next sentence while the other person was still talking. I was just there, listening, responding, present. And that's when it hit me. This is what fluency actually feels like. Not fast speech, not perfect grammar, but natural presence. The ability to stay in the moment without fear. That feeling didn't come from studying harder. It came from living differently, from allowing mistakes, from choosing warmth, from practicing honesty over perfection. And here's the part that matters most. This didn't just improve my English. It transformed my relationship. Because when you remove the pressure of being perfect, you create space for being real. And real connection is always stronger than perfect communication. I also noticed something else. The way we handled small problems had changed. Before, even a small misunderstanding could create tension. Not because the problem was big, but because our communication was fragile.
Now,
Small issues stayed small because we addressed them early.
clearly, calmly.
I think I misunderstood that. Can you explain that again? I didn't mean it that way. Simple sentences, but powerful, because they prevent small cracks from becoming big breaks. That's another shift that happens when things become easier. You stop avoiding problems and start handling them. Not aggressively, not emotionally, just directly. And that creates stability. There's also a biological side to this. When communication feels safe and consistent, your nervous system regulates more easily. You spend less time in stress mode and more time in a calm, balanced state. That means you react less. You understand more. You feel safer even in difficult moments. And safety is the foundation of everything. Without it, communication feels like effort. With it, communication feels like flow. Looking back, I can see how far things had come. From silence that felt heavy to conversations that felt natural. From fear of speaking to comfort in expressing. From overthinking every word to trusting simple sentences. And yet, the biggest change wasn't in how I spoke.
It was in how I saw myself.
I no longer saw my English as a limitation. I saw it as a tool. Not perfect, but enough. And enough is a powerful place to be. Because when something is enough, you stop chasing it. And when you stop chasing, you start using, living,
Connecting.
That's when everything becomes real. But here's the surprising part. Even when things feel easy, the journey isn't over. Because ease brings clarity. And clarity brings reflection. You start to look back, not at the mistakes, but at the lessons. What worked? What didn't? What actually made the difference? And those lessons become something you can carry forward. Not just for yourself, but for others. Because once you've gone through something difficult and found your way through it, you begin to understand something deeper. It was never about language alone. It was never about being perfect. It was about something much simpler. Something most people overlook. And that realization was the final piece of the story. The one that made everything make sense. The quiet rules that changed everything. What if the thing that finally helped you connect wasn't more effort, but a few quiet rules you didn't even know you were following? Because when I look back at everything that changed, our conversations, our relationship, even my confidence in English, it didn't happen because I suddenly became better. It happened because I started doing a few simple things consistently. Not perfectly.
Just consistently.
And the strange part? At the time, I didn't even realize I was creating a system. I was just trying to stay connected. But over time, those small choices became patterns. And those patterns became something powerful. Looking back now, I can see them clearly. Not as techniques, but as quiet rules that shaped everything. The first rule was this. Say something real even if it's small. Before, I thought meaningful communication required meaningful sentences. Something deep, something well-structured, something worth saying. But that belief kept me silent, because most moments in life are not dramatic.
They're ordinary.
And if you wait for something big to say, you miss the chance to connect in small ways. I feel a bit tired today. I liked that moment earlier. I'm not sure why, but today felt heavy. These are simple sentences, but they open doors. And once a door is open, connection has somewhere to go. There's a psychological principle behind this called emotional accessibility. It means making your internal state visible, even in small ways. And the more accessible you are, the easier it is for others to meet you. The second rule was quieter, but just as important. Don't assume, ask. This one changed everything. Because most of our past distance wasn't caused by what was said. It was caused by what was imagined. A short answer becomes a negative story. A quiet moment becomes a sign of distance. A neutral tone becomes something personal. But when you ask, "Did you mean it this way? Can you explain that a bit more?" "I'm not sure I understood." You replace assumption with clarity. And clarity removes unnecessary tension. There's something interesting about the brain here. When you don't have enough information, your mind fills in the gaps automatically. And because of something called negativity bias, it often fills those gaps with worst-case interpretations. But questions interrupt that process. They give your brain real data. And real data is almost always less dramatic than your imagination. The third rule took me longer to understand. Warmth matters more than wording. This might be the most important one. Because for a long time, I believed that if I could just say things correctly, everything would improve. But real life showed me something different. You can say the right sentence with the wrong tone and create distance. Or you can say a simple sentence with warmth and create connection. I'm here. It's okay. I understand. These are not complex phrases. But when they're real, they carry weight. That's because of how human communication actually works. Your brain processes tone and emotional signals faster than it processes language. So people don't just hear what you say, they feel how you say it. And feeling is what they remember. The fourth rule was surprisingly practical. Slow down, just enough to feel what you're saying. Not too slow, not unnatural, just enough to stay present. Because when you rush, you disconnect from your own words. You speak automatically. You react quickly. You miss the emotional layer. But when you slow down slightly, something shifts. You become aware of your tone. You notice the other person. You give space for real responses. And that space is where connection grows. In communication science, this is linked to processing time. When conversations move too fast, your brain switches to efficiency mode. When they slow down, it switches to relational mode. And relationships need that space. The fifth rule was the simplest and the hardest to accept. You don't need to be perfect to be understood. This one took time, because somewhere in my mind, I believed that mistakes would damage connection. That wrong grammar, wrong words, or awkward sentences would create distance. But reality showed me the opposite. Distance came from silence. Connection came from effort. Even imperfect effort. There were moments when I said things wrong. Moments when I paused too long. Moments when I couldn't find the exact word. And nothing broke. No connection disappeared. Because what mattered wasn't the structure of the sentence. It was the intention behind it. And intention is something people can feel. There's even research that supports this. Studies in communication psychology show that people are more likely to trust someone who is slightly imperfect but genuine than someone who is perfectly correct but emotionally distant. Because perfection feels controlled, but honesty feels human. And humans connect with humans, not with perfect systems. The last rule wasn't really a rule. It was more like a realization. Connection is not something you achieve. It's something you maintain. There is no final level. No moment where everything is fixed. Because relationships, like language, are dynamic. They move. They change. They require attention. But not intense effort. Just consistent presence. Small check-ins. Simple honesty. A willingness to stay, even when things feel slightly uncomfortable. Looking back, I didn't transform my life with big decisions. I changed it with small, repeatable actions. And over time, Those actions created something stable, something real, something that didn't depend on perfect English, perfect timing, or perfect conditions. Just consistent connection. So if you're watching this, maybe feeling stuck, not just in language, but in communication in relationships, in expressing yourself, you don't need to fix everything. You don't need to become perfect. You just need to start small. Say one real thing today. Ask one clear question. Slow down one moment. Add a little warmth. That's it. Because change doesn't come from intensity. It comes from repetition. And repetition builds something stronger than perfection ever could. And when you look back one day, you won't remember the perfect sentences. You'll remember the moments that felt real. But even after understanding all of this, there was still one final truth waiting. A truth that made everything simpler, clearer, almost obvious. Something that had been there from the beginning, but I couldn't see it until the very end. And that truth is what gave this entire story its meaning. Warmth over words, the ending that stayed. What if the answer was always simple, but you were looking for something complicated? Not better English. Not perfect timing. Not the right words. Just warmth. By the time I reached this point, everything looked almost the same from the outside. The same home in the United States. The same daily routines. The same people moving through the same spaces. But inside, everything had changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, completely. We still had days that felt long. Conversations that didn't go perfectly. Moments where words didn't come easily. Life didn't become a perfect story. But it became something better. It became real. And real is enough. There was a moment, not special, not planned, that made this truth very clear. It was late evening. The house was calm. The kind of calm that feels earned, not empty. We had finished everything for the day. No pressure. No rules. Just a quiet space where nothing needed to happen. We were sitting together. No phones. No distractions. Just presence. And for a while we didn't say anything. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt warm. That's when I realized something I had been searching for this entire time. Silence is not the problem. Cold silence is. And warmth changes everything. I looked over, and without thinking too much, I said something simple. I like this. That's it. Not a deep sentence. Not poetic. Not impressive. But it was honest. And the response came soft and immediate. Me too. No long conversation followed. No big emotional moment. But something settled. Something stable. Something that didn't need more words to prove itself. That's when the final truth became clear to me. Love doesn't need perfect language. It needs emotional presence. And presence is something you choose, again and again in small ways. Looking back at everything, the silence, the fear, the slow conversations, the misunderstandings, the cultural differences, the small changes, the family, the growth, I can finally see the pattern. It was never about fixing language. Language was just the surface. Underneath it was something deeper. Connection. And connection doesn't follow grammar rules. It follows emotional signals. Warmth. Attention. Honesty. That's what people respond to. That's what builds trust. That's what stays. There's also something beautiful about how the brain works when you reach this stage. Your nervous system becomes more regulated. You don't react as quickly. You don't overthink every word. You don't interpret every silence as a problem. You feel steady. And that steadiness changes how you show up. You listen more. You assume less. You speak when it matters. You stay quiet when it feels natural. And in that balance, communication becomes effortless. Not perfect, but effortless. I also realized something else, something I wish I had understood earlier. You don't need to arrive at fluency to live your life fully. You can build relationships. You can express emotions. You can create meaning. Even with simple English. Even with mistakes. Even with pauses. Because people don't fall in love with your grammar. They connect with your presence. And once you truly understand that, everything becomes lighter. You stop waiting. You stop holding back. You stop thinking, I'll be better later. And you start living now. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this. Not loud, not visible, but stable. It's the confidence of knowing. I may not say everything perfectly, but I can still be understood. And that is more powerful than perfect fluency, because it allows you to show up in your life without fear. In your relationships, in your conversations, in your everyday moments. And when you show up consistently, connection naturally follows. If you've watched this far, maybe you see a part of yourself in this story. Maybe you've felt that silence, that hesitation, that fear of not saying things right. Maybe you've been waiting to improve, to feel ready, to become more confident before you fully express yourself. But here's the truth, simple and clear. You don't need to wait. You just need to start small. Say one real thing. Ask one honest question. Stay one moment longer in a conversation. Add a little warmth where there used to be none. That's it. Because love, real love, doesn't grow from perfection. It grows from presence, from showing up again and again, even when it's not smooth. And if there's one sentence that captures everything I've learned, it's this. Love doesn't need perfect words. It only needs enough warmth to stay. That's the story. Not about language, not about being perfect, but about choosing connection in the simplest ways possible. And maybe, just maybe, that's all you've needed this whole time. If you've made it this far, let me ask you something you probably haven't asked yourself in a long time. What if the life you're waiting to live doesn't start when your English is perfect, but the moment you decide to stop hiding behind silence? Because here's the truth most people don't say out loud. Fluency doesn't create connection. Courage does. Warmth does. Showing up imperfectly, consistently does. This story wasn't just about love in the United States. It was about something deeper, how real connection is built in everyday life through simple English, honest moments, and the choice to stay present even when it feels uncomfortable. So before you leave this video, don't just feel inspired. Do something small. Say one real sentence today. Start one honest conversation. Stay one moment longer than you usually would. That's how everything begins. And if this story made you feel something, even just a little, then this channel is for you. Because here, we don't just learn English. We live it. We feel it. We turn it into real connection. Subscribe now for more Real English Story Practice 2026, where every story is simple, slow, and powerful enough to change how you speak and how you connect. Like this video and share it with someone who needs it, because sometimes one story can say what we've been holding inside for years. And in the next video, I'll share another real story, one that starts with a single message and ends with a choice that changes everything. Stay with me, because the next story might be yours.